There comes a moment in every person's life when, without warning, something inside breaks. It's not sadness, it's not anger, it's something deeper. It's as if the soul grows tired of carrying the weight of others' expectations, of maintaining relationships that only drain, of trying to fit into spaces that no longer belong. It is in that instant that what Carl Jung described as the beginning of the true process of individuation occurs, the breaking point where the mask falls and the authentic self begins to emerge. The curious thing is that this moment doesn't arrive with grand announcements. There is no sign in the sky, no notice on the calendar that says, "Today is the day you will set yourself free." It doesn't come when you least expect it, but when you need it most. It comes after many nights spent trying to convince yourself that things would get better, that maybe if you changed, if you tried harder, if you ignored that feeling in your chest screaming that something wasn't right, then everything would fall into place. But it doesn't. It never does. And then, in the midst of that emotional exhaustion, the decision happens. No more. For Jung, this moment is a call from the unconscious. It's not a whim, nor a mere emotional reaction. It is a profound message from the psyche, a silent scream that has been there for years, waiting to be heard. It is the beginning of a journey with no return because once you decide to let go of what doesn't belong to you, once you dare to walk toward your authenticity, there is no turning back. The person you once were begins to fade, and in their place, someone new emerges, someone stronger, more aware, more you. What many don't understand is that saying no more is not an act of rebellion, but an act of self-love. It's not the end, it's the beginning. But why is it so difficult? Why, even knowing that something harms us, is it so hard to let it go? Jung explained it in a way so clear that it hurts to accept, because we have built our identity around what makes us suffer. Perhaps you haven't noticed, but for years you've been telling yourself the same story. You've justified your pain with phrases like, "That's just the way things are. I can't do anything to change it. Maybe I deserve this." Or, "What if I end up alone?" Your unconscious has accepted these ideas as truths, and that has shaped your reality. You have stayed in relationships that don't add to your life, in jobs that dim your spirit, in dynamics that only drain you. And the worst part is that a part of you has come to believe that this is normal, that this is life, but it's not. Jung taught us that the soul constantly seeks its own evolution, and that evolution involves letting go of what no longer resonates with our authentic being. However, in order to do so, we must go through a painful but transformative process. The encounter with the shadow. The shadow is everything you have repressed, the parts of yourself you were taught to hide, the desires, thoughts, and emotions you considered unacceptable. But the shadow does not disappear just because you ignore it. On the contrary, it manifests in your life subtly but consistently, in the patterns you repeat, in the relationships that hurt you, in the anxiety you cannot explain. And here lies the crucial point. When you say no more, you are confronting and challenging the belief system that has kept you trapped. You are, in a way, dying so that you can be reborn. That's why it hurts. That's why it's so hard. Because you're not just letting go of a person, a job, a situation. You're letting go of a version of yourself, a version that has accompanied you for years, that has been your refuge, your excuse, your comfort zone. But that no longer serves you. That is no longer you. When you decide to let go, the unconscious reacts. At first, you will feel fear, you will doubt, you will wonder if you made the right decision. And it is at that point that many turn back. But this is where you must remember something fundamental. Fear is not a sign that you were wrong. It's a sign that you are changing. The unconscious does not want you to change. Its function is to keep you in the familiar, in the predictable. But the soul has another plan. And this is where the true internal battle begins. The battle between the comfort of the old and the uncertainty of the new. But if you manage to hold on, if you go through the initial chaos without turning back, something incredible happens. You start to regain your energy. Jung spoke of this as a kind of psychic rebirth. For years, your energy has been scattered, trapped in dynamics that did not allow you to grow. Every time you tolerated a situation you didn't want, you gave away a part of your vitality. Every time you repressed an emotion out of fear of rejection, you distanced yourself a little more from your essence. But when you make the decision to let go, all that energy returns to you. It's an almost magical process. What once seemed impossible suddenly becomes clear. What once hurt suddenly doesn't matter as much. And what you once thought you needed suddenly stops making sense. But there's something more, something no one tells you, something you only discover when you go through this process. The self-love that emerges after saying no more is incomparable to any other form of love. It is a love that does not depend on external validation, that does not need approval. It is a love that is born from within, from the certainty that you are enough just as you are. And when you discover that, when you experience that level of love for yourself, your life changes forever. You stop looking outside for what has always been within. You stop settling for crumbs because you understand your true worth. You stop waiting for someone else to save you because you realize that you always had the power to save yourself. And there, at that point, is when everything begins to align. Not because the universe rewards you for making the right decision, but because you are finally in tune with what was always meant to be yours. Relationships change, paths open, opportunities appear, not because you are doing something different, but because you are finally being yourself. But this process does not end here, because once you discover this self-love, there is something else you must do, something that will determine the rest of your life. When you start experiencing the self-love that arises after saying no more, something in your perception of the world changes. You used to justify toxic behaviors, downplay warning signs, and tolerate what deep down you knew wasn't right. But now, with a new awareness of yourself, you can no longer ignore what once went unnoticed. It's as if you have woken up from a long sleep, and for the first time, you see reality without filters. What once seemed normal now feels unbearable. The excuses you used to give yourself no longer make sense. And here is where one of the deepest transformations occurs. You start to see people as they are, not as you wish they were. For years, you convinced yourself that if you tried hard enough, you could change someone. You could make them see your worth. You could be so good, so understanding, so loyal, that sooner or later you would receive the love and respect you deserved. But now you understand that this was never your responsibility, that no matter how much love you give, you cannot fill the void of someone who does not want to fill it themselves. Jung explained that when a person has not integrated their shadow, they project their own internal conflicts onto others. That is why, in many relationships, the same dynamics repeat over and over again. A person who has not faced their own darkness will unconsciously seek someone to serve as a mirror to project their chaos. And if in the past you were that person, if you allowed someone to unload their wounds onto you without taking responsibility for them, it was because you had not yet realized something fundamental. You were not there to heal them. You were there to learn to heal yourself. But when you say no more, when you refuse to continue in that dynamic, something unexpected happens. The people who used to control you with guilt, manipulation, or empty promises begin to reveal their true face. Maybe they react with anger. Maybe they try to make you feel like you are the one failing. Maybe they tell you that you have changed, and the truth is, they're right. You have changed. You are no longer the person who accepted the unacceptable. You are no longer the one who stayed silent out of fear of losing. Self-love is not a fleeting feeling. It is an internal construction that, once built, becomes the foundation upon which you build your entire life. But for this love to endure, you must face the hardest test of all, solitude. Because when you decide to let go of what no longer serves you, an emptiness remains. A space that was once occupied by relationships, habits, and beliefs that, although painful, were familiar to you. And in that emptiness, in that uncertainty, fear appears. The fear of having made a mistake, the fear of being alone, the fear of never finding something better. But this is where you must remember what Jung taught. The unconscious does not seek comfort. It seeks transformation. And transformation always involves a period of chaos before clarity arrives. During this process, it is normal for nostalgia to make you doubt, for moments to arise where you miss what you left behind. Not because you want it back, but because your mind has not yet adapted to freedom. But that feeling of loss is only temporary because deep down, there is something you know with certainty. You could never go back to being the person you were before awakening. And at that precise moment, you begin to attract something entirely different. Not because you are desperately trying to fill the void, but because you are now vibrating at a different frequency. Jung said that what we experience in the outer world is nothing more than a reflection of our inner world. When you were broken inside, when you didn't value yourself, you attracted people and situations that reinforced that belief. But now that you have recognized your worth, now that you have understood that self-love is non-negotiable, everything changes. The people you once surrounded yourself with no longer fit into your life. Not because you have decided to push them away, but because they no longer resonate with you. Situations that you once would have tolerated now seem unbearable. And instead of wondering if you're being too demanding, you realize that you are simply setting a new standard. You no longer accept less than you deserve, not because you think you're superior, but because you have finally become someone who respects themselves. This is where many people fail, where they turn back because the process of transformation is not linear. There are moments when you feel like you're making progress, and moments when it seems like you're moving backward. But the key is not to be swayed by uncertainty. Jung said that the greatest danger on the path of individuation is the fear of emptiness. And indeed, the void can be terrifying. But what we were never taught is that it is the sacred space where the new can be born. If you fill that space too quickly, if you go back to what you already know out of fear of uncertainty, you will never discover what was truly meant for you. That is why, after saying no more, after letting go of what was not serving you, the most important step is to allow yourself to be in that emptiness, to feel it, to explore who you are without all those emotional burdens. Because something wonderful happens when you resist the temptation to fill the space with the first thing that appears. Clarity arrives. That clarity that once seemed unreachable. That deep understanding that you need nothing external to feel complete. And when you reach this point, when you truly understand what it means to love yourself, life begins to respond to you in ways you never imagined. Because now you no longer act from lack, but from abundance. You no longer seek love, you project it. You no longer beg for attention, you attract it. You no longer settle for the minimum because you know your worth. And that energy, that new version of yourself, begins to reflect in everything around you. The people who come into your life no longer seek to take advantage of you, but to share with you. The opportunities that once seemed impossible are now within your reach. Not because the world has changed, but because you have changed. And this is where true magic happens. Because when you become someone who loves themselves, when you truly integrate this transformation, you don't just change your life, you change the lives of those around you. Because you become a beacon, living proof that it is possible to let go, to be reborn, to live authentically. But this is just the beginning. Because once you discover this power within yourself, there is one last step you need to take to make this transformation permanent. When you discover the self-love that emerges after saying no more, you feel a freedom you have never experienced before. But this is where many people face the final test, the temptation to go back. Not because they want to return to pain, but because the unknown still generates fear. Your mind will try to deceive you, showing you only the good moments of the past, minimizing all the suffering you endured, whispering doubts into your ear. What if it wasn't that bad? What if I never find something better? What if I was too drastic? But now you know the truth. You know that every time you justified suffering, what you were really doing was prolonging it. You know that every time you chose to stay where you weren't valued, you were denying your own growth. And most importantly, you know that going back is no longer an option, because the person you were when you accepted the unacceptable no longer exists. Jung explained that the human psyche expands with every meaningful experience. You cannot shrink back into what you were before awakening. Trying to do so would only cause you more suffering because deep down, you no longer fit into that old version of yourself. And yet the challenge remains. Life will test you. Maybe the same person you walked away from will try to return. Maybe a similar situation will reappear with a different face. But this time, you have an advantage. You have awareness. When you choose to evolve, When you truly integrate self-love into every aspect of your life, you develop a new ability to see the truth without deceiving yourself. And the truth is clear. Anything that asks you to betray your inner peace does not deserve a place in your life. Any relationship that requires you to stop being yourself is not love. It's a prison disguised as companionship. This is where many people fail because they confuse love with dependency. They believe that missing something means they still need it, when in reality, it is only the echo of an old emotional habit that is still fading away. Missing something does not mean you made the wrong decision. It means your mind is recalibrating, that your unconscious is letting go of layers of programming that you carried for years. What determines whether you truly learned the lesson is not the pain of letting go, but what you choose to do with that emptiness. If you fill it with the first thing that comes along, with something that only provides you with momentary gratification, you will keep repeating the same cycles. But if, instead of looking for distractions, you choose to use this space to get to know yourself better, to work on yourself, to connect with what you truly desire, then you are preparing yourself to receive something completely different. Life responds to the energy you project. When you were broken, you attracted from lack, from need. But now that you've learned to be okay with yourself, things change. Relationships no longer arise from the fear of loneliness, but from genuine compatibility. You no longer settle for the minimum because you no longer feel the need to beg for love. Now what you give comes from fullness, not desperation, and the difference is vast. The interesting thing about this process is that when you stop looking outside for what was always inside, everything starts to come naturally. Synchronicity, a concept Jung explored in depth, begins to manifest in your life. You no longer feel like you're swimming against the current because things simply flow. The answers you once sought with anxiety appear at the right moment. The people who truly resonate with you begin to enter your life effortlessly. And most importantly, you no longer fear. Because when you truly understand your worth, when you have experienced the power of loving yourself unconditionally, you realize that you will never again allow anyone to try to define you, shape you, or make you feel insufficient. External validation becomes irrelevant because your internal validation is unshakable. It is at this point that the transformation consolidates. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You no longer seek the world's acceptance because you have learned to accept yourself. You have integrated your shadow, you have understood your lessons, and now you walk with a certainty that you didn't have before. It is a level of peace that cannot be explained with words. It can only be experienced. This is where many begin to notice something curious. When you change this way, some people from your past will try to return. Not because they have changed, but because they feel they no longer have power over you. When they could manipulate you before, now they see that you are unbreakable. When they could play with your emotions before, now they discover they can't knock you off balance. And this confuses them, not because you hate them, not because you want revenge, but because now they see something in you that was always there, but that you never recognized, your power. But the difference is that now you do recognize it. Now you know who you are. Now you know what you deserve. When you reach this point, there is no turning back. Because you no longer care to prove anything, you no longer need to explain yourself. You no longer feel the need to make others understand your worth. You simply are. And that is the greatest victory of all. When you reach this state of true self-love, life stops feeling like a struggle and begins to feel like creation. You are no longer trapped in cycles of suffering. You no longer repeat old wounds. Now you consciously choose what you allow into your life because you have understood that everything around you is a reflection of what you believe you deserve. And now you finally know what you deserve. That is the true meaning of self-love. It's not about being perfect. It's not about not having moments of doubt. It's about knowing with every fiber of your being that you will never again settle for less than what you truly deserve. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to a choice: to keep living according to others' expectations or to dare to live the life you truly desire. The moment you truly understand your worth is the moment your life changes forever. It's as if you have finally woken up from an illusion that kept you trapped in dynamics of suffering, stagnant relationships, and a misguided concept of love. And when you realize that you will never again allow something or someone to make you doubt your worth, everything around you begins to transform. At first, it may seem strange. You are used to the struggle, to justifying the unjustifiable, to postponing your peace in the name of patience or hope that things will get better. But now, in this new state of awareness, you can no longer betray yourself. You can no longer ignore the signs. And that makes you someone different. Not because you have changed your essence, but because you have finally reconnected with it. The people who once knew you may say that you are no longer the same. And it's true. You are no longer available for the dynamics you used to tolerate. You are no longer the one who justified the lack of reciprocity. You no longer try to fit into places where you're not welcomed. Because now you understand that every time you betrayed your intuition, you were choosing your own suffering. Carl Jung said that when we repress our truth, the unconscious seeks ways to bring it to the surface. It can do so through dreams, physical symptoms, anxiety, or a persistent feeling of emptiness. For years, you ignored those signals, convinced that it was normal to feel this way. But now you see it clearly. It was never normal to live with that emotional burden. It was never normal to stay where you were not valued. It was never normal to silence your intuition to avoid bothering others. The difference now is that you've learned to listen. You've learned to recognize what your soul is trying to tell you at every moment. And most importantly, you've learned to trust yourself, because that's the key. Self-love is not an empty concept nor a simple, pretty idea. It's trust that what you feel is valid, trust that you deserve something better, trust that you don't need to cling to what no longer nurtures you. When you become someone who respects themselves, life starts to reflect that respect everywhere. Not because you've become stronger in the traditional sense, but because you no longer settle for less than you deserve. And the funny thing is, you don't even need to make great efforts for this to happen. It's a matter of energy. When you raise your standards, when you no longer tolerate the intolerable, the people who once took advantage of your low self-esteem start to distance themselves on their own. They can no longer manipulate you. They can no longer use you as a dumping ground for their emotional chaos. And if they try, they quickly realize that you are no longer the same. This is where some people get scared, not because they want to return to what they used to be, but because the void left after letting go of the toxic can be intimidating. There will be moments when you'll question if you really did the right thing, but in those moments, all you need to do is remember a simple but powerful truth. Self-love doesn't feel like immediate euphoria. It feels like peace. That peace that once seemed unreachable. That peace you used to seek in others and now discover within yourself. That peace that doesn't depend on what someone else does or doesn't do, because now you understand that the most important relationship you will have in your life is the one you have with yourself. And that changes everything. Now, at this new level of consciousness, the trials don't disappear. The temptations to go back may still appear, but the difference is that now you know how to distinguish between what is real and what is just an illusion from the past. You don't need to justify yourself. You don't need to give explanations. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth, because you know it, you feel it, you live it. And here is where the real change happens. Because when you live from this place, when you've integrated self-love as a natural state, something incredible happens. You no longer care to impress anyone. You no longer seek validation. You no longer obsess over being understood, because you understand that not everyone is ready for this transformation. Some people will tell you that you've changed too much, that you're no longer the same, and they'll be right. But what they don't understand is that you didn't change to fit into a new mold. You changed because you finally freed yourself from one. When you live with self-love, your energy feels different. It's as if everything that used to affect you no longer has the same impact. You no longer react to manipulation. You no longer let yourself be dragged by guilt. You no longer allow someone who doesn't know what they want to make you doubt what you do want. And that clarity, that certainty, is what finally gives you the power that was always within you. Life becomes simpler, not because you no longer face challenges, but because now you know which battles are worth it and which are not. You know you don't need to prove anything. You know that what's for you will come without forcing it. You know that what doesn't flow is not a challenge you need to conquer, but a sign that it's not your path. And when you reach this point, you realize something surprising. You no longer care about going back, because at the end of the day, it all boils down to one choice. Live in the repetition of patterns that only bring pain, or dare to create a completely new reality. You've already made your choice. You will never again be the person who ignored their intuition. You will never again settle for what doesn't serve you. You will never again allow someone to define your worth, because now you understand something that will change your life forever. Self-love is not a goal, it's a path, and now you're finally walking in the right direction. When you discover the self-love that comes after saying no more, there is no turning back. What once seemed like an inner struggle now turns into absolute clarity. The uncertainty dissolves because you no longer need anyone to confirm your worth. You know it. And here's the key to everything. The world responds to the energy you project. Now that you've reconnected with yourself, now that you've learned to respect yourself, to honor yourself, to let go of what no longer serves you, life begins to align with this new version of you. Because when you walk with certainty, when you've left behind the doubts and fears that once kept you trapped, everything that is authentic starts to gravitate towards you. Maybe before it was hard to understand why some people seemed to move forward with ease while you felt stuck. But now you know the truth. It wasn't life that was against you. It was you who was clinging to what no longer had space in your growth. Now you see it clearly. Now you understand that what happened to you was not a punishment. It was a learning process. Now you realize that every relationship, every experience, every loss had a purpose. To bring you here, to this moment in which you finally recognize yourself, in which you finally choose yourself, in which you finally decide to live in harmony with who you truly are. And it's here where the real magic begins. Because when you change, your environment changes. When you transform, the people who enter your life are different. When you raise your standards, the universe responds with opportunities, with connections, with experiences that reflect this new level of consciousness. And all of this starts with a single decision, the decision to never again accept less than you deserve. Now that you have this clarity, I want you to do something. Don't keep this message to yourself. Share this knowledge with someone who needs it, with someone who is still trapped in the same cycle you've escaped from. Because what you've just heard is not just a reflection, it's a tool for transformation. Leave your comment down below and tell me which part of this message resonated with you. I want to hear from you. I want to know what stage of this process you're in and what you've learned from your own experience. And if this content has touched your soul, help me reach more people. Share this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so we can keep growing together on this path of self-awareness and transformation. Remember that every time you interact with this content, you're not only helping yourself, but you're also helping more people receive this message at the moment they need it most. Together, we can build a community of people who have decided to awaken, who have decided to leave behind what doesn't belong to them and move forward toward the life they truly deserve. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for daring to choose yourself. See you in the next video. And remember, change begins with you.